Good day everyone, I'm Kimberly F. Magadia and I'll be reporting petroleum seals and traps. Petroleum traps are below-ground traps where a permeable reservoir rock is covered by some low-permeability cap rock. Typical cap rocks are compacted shales, evaporites and tightly cemented sandstones, and carbonate rocks. Traps are usually classified according to the mechanism that produces the hydrocarbon accumulation. The two main groups of traps are those that are formed by structural deformation of rocks, which is structural traps, and those that are related to depositional or diagenetic features in the sedimentary sequence, which is stratigraphic traps. Structural traps are primarily the result of folding and/or faulting or both. These traps are types that form as a result of some structural deformation, a bend or dip of rock. These traps are several forms and shapes as a result of different types of deformation. Anticlinal fold and dome traps. Simple fold traps with axial culmination. This is the simplest type of trap. It is formed when a sandstone bed that is overlain by tight shale is folded into anticline. A simple anticline, however, may not necessarily be a trap. The crest of anticline must have an apical culmination somewhere along the fold axis so that the hydrocarbons can be trapped. Salt domes. Strata around the salt dome curve upward, creating traps against the sealing salt layers. Salt dome traps are formed as a result of below-ground salt, which is less dense than the rock above it, moving upward slowly. This upward migration of salt can deform and break up rock along the way. Growth domes. Domes are anticlines that form during sedimentation when one area subsides more slowly than the surrounding areas. Their formation is concurrent with sedimentation and not due to later folding. Growth anticlines may form due to differential compaction over salt domes and other upward projecting features in substrate topographic highs on the buried landscape. Fault traps. The fault plane must have sealing effect so that it function as a fluid migration barrier for reservoir rocks. These types of traps are formed when reservoir rock is split along a fault line. Between the walls of split reservoir, clay traps oil and prevent it from leaving the trap. Normal faults, commonly associated with graben reef structures. One or more form all or part of lateral closure by sealing the reservoir. Strike slip faults. These may not be sealed due to incremental movements, but basement-controlled strike slip faults commonly produce good anticlinal structures and overlying softer sediments. Thrust faults, commonly associated with compressional tectonics. Forms all or part by declosure by sealing the reservoir either laterally or from the top or bottom. Growth faults. Growth faults typically form in sediments that are deposited rapidly, especially at deltas. Faulting occurs during sedimentation such the equivalent strata on the down-throw side will be thicker than on the up-throw side. The throw between corresponding strata declines upward along the fault plane. Minor fault planes with an opposite throw may also form in the strata that curve inward towards in the main fault plane. The geometry and timing determine whether the faults will be effective in forming fault traps. So the first one is dead faults. Dead faults that are predate basal sediments only affect the underlying basement. They play no direct role in hydrocarbon trapping in younger sedimentary pile. The second one is the continuously developing faults or growth faults. These are the active during sedimentation and are major petroleum traps. Young late faults. These form late during sedimentation depending on their initiation and growth. They may or may not be effective as traps. Late regenerated faults. These are new movements on old faults. They are more likely to destroy than to form traps, but may be effective. Many petroleum fields are closely linked to faulting, but traps that result from faulting alone are less common. There are three common fault petroleum pool associations. The fault itself makes the trap without an ancillary trapping mechanism such as fold. Normal faults are the most common examples. The fault creates another structure that turn forms the main trap. The third is the fault may be consequence of another structure that forms the main trap, the extensional crustal faults that form above some anticlines. Faults are highly ambiguous features. They may leak acting as a permeable conduits for fluid flow, but more commonly acts as a seal unless they are rejuvenated after petroleum has pooled. They form seals because of fault gauges or differential pressures either side of the fault plane. Salt dome reservoirs. Salt domes form when salt is less dense than the overlying rock and the salt moves slowly upward due to its buoyancy. For this to happen, there must be a minimum overburden and the thickness of the salt deposits must be more than 100 meters. Upward movement of salt through the sedimentary strata and associated deformation is termed halokinetics or salt tectonics. Movements may continue for several 100 million years. Traps may form in the strata overlying the salt dome, in the top of the salt domes, in the strata that curve upward against the salt intrusion, due to stratigraphic pinch-out of strata around the salt dome. Salt dome reservoirs produce major oil fields where basinal sediments contain thick salt deposits. Salt deposits are common in Permian Jurassic sediments around Atlantic Ocean. Stratigraphic traps. Stratigraphic traps are created by any variation in the stratigraphy that is independent of structural deformation. Although many stratigraphic traps involve a tectonic component such as tilting of strata. These traps are formed as a result of deposition in sedimentary rocks. When the sediment that creates the reservoir rock is deposited in a discontinuous layer, the seals are created beside on the top of the reservoir. In some cases, these seals are made of impermeable or low permeability shale deposited around the reservoir, blocking the oil and gas inside. These seals themselves may also be source rock. Two main groups can be recognized as primary stratigraphic traps and secondary stratigraphic traps. Primary stratigraphic traps result from variations in phases that develop during sedimentation. These include features such as lenticular pinch-outs and appropriate phases changes. The examples include primary pinch-out of strata, strata that pinch out up deep in less permeable rock such as shale. Alluvial channels of sandstone that are isolated and surrounded by impermeable clay-rich sediments. Submarine channels and sandstone turbidites in strata rich in shale. Porous reefs that are surrounded by shale, etc. Secondary stratigraphic traps result from variations that develop after sedimentation, mainly because of diagenesis. These include variations due to porosity enhancement by dissolution or loss by cementation. Paleogeomorphic traps are controlled by buried landscape. Some are associated with prominence, others with depressions. Many are also partly controlled by unconformities, so are also termed unconformity traps. The picture in the upper right is that the oil is trapped below unconformity in paleotopographic highs below transgressive shales. And the picture below is that the oil trap above unconformity in paleotopographic lows formed by porous channel sands. Fractured reservoirs. Fractured basement rock that projects upward locally into overlying shales can also provide good traps. Fractured, well-cemented rocks, such as limestones and cherts, along faults may also form good traps of limited lateral extent. As you can see, oil is trapped in fracture porosity below a disconformity. Also, oil is trapped in fracture porosity adjacent to fault plane. Hydrodynamic traps. If pore water flow in a sedimentary basin is strong enough, the oil-water contact may deviate from horizontal because of the hydrodynamic shear stress that is set up. In some cases, oil may accumulate without closure. Flow of fresh water down through oil-bearing rocks commonly results in biodegradation of oil and formation of asphalt, which may then form a caprock for oil.